Hi, everyone. Welcome to the show. It's the Show Up with Christine Chang podcast. We're in a new studio. And if you're watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe. And maybe even leave a comment because that helps me a lot. I'm so excited. Today we have Elishah Urbaez on the show. She's been in the beauty industry for over 15 years. She does makeup on set for shows that are on Netflix and Hulu. She's also owner of The Alchemy Goddess. It's a wellness company that sells things like these amazing gua shas. If you don't know what gua shas are, Elishah, do you want to explain this? Because I'm actually surprised that some people don't know what this is. Maybe I'm on Instagram too much, but I'm like, you don't know what a gua sha is?
Gua sha translates into scraping sand out of the body. So you're trying to scrape all of the inflammation out of your body. I like that you're doing this. A little distracting.
I use this every morning and it does work because my face, if I'm loaded down
Yeah.
here on my jawline, which is like every day, and you have muscle in your face just like everywhere else
Yes,
too,
so
right?
you're toning and detoxing, and you're also trying to stimulate the lymphatic system, which the lymphatic system is the clear fluid in your body. So when you get a cut in your skin, you see that sometimes it like oozes clear liquid.
Yeah.
And so it's like kind of like the garbage collector in your body. So you're trying to remove that from your body.
Yeah. I mean, we get massages in other places in our body. Why not your face? And I could feel it's crunchy.
Yeah, a lot of people forget about the face. And you're actually releasing a lot of tension when you're doing that.
Yes, it feels so good.
Because we hold a lot of stress. A lot of us also clench our jaws. So this actually,
That's me. I grind
you
at
grind
night.
at night. Yeah. So this is really good to help alleviate the tension in your jaw.
This is fun. I'm starting this episode off like it's QVC or something like that. But I swear to God, this product, well, there's different ones. There's the rollers and stuff. I've tried like all of them. This one, the ones you saw that have either like the heart shape or
Yeah.
this is the best one because it gets in there, especially for the jawline. I don't know if you guys can hear the crunchiness, but it feels really good.
And the comb actually is really good for stimulating hair growth also, and for fine lines and wrinkles. Or smile lines. Not that anybody has any wrinkles or fine lines.
Love talking about beauty, but we're also going to talk about fun things like dating, relationships, childhood trauma. I feel like this should be regular conversation, especially, I mean, unless you're really lucky, most people have grown up with something, something has happened. And unless you are conscious and you want to do the work to heal from them, it can have a big impact on your day-to-day adult life. So today we're going to talk about all that. Elishah and I, we know each other. Our husbands are friends. They love soccer. Pete really loves Simon, like really likes him.
Aw, the feeling is mutual.
So you were raised your mom was a single mom.
She was a single mom. Bless her. She tried her best.
Were you born in the States?
I was born in New York City.
Okay. Was she born in the States?
She was not born in the States.
Okay.
She was born in Dominican Republic, and she came when she was 12. She raised me all by herself.
I can't imagine raising a child.
Yeah. So she met
On
my
your own.
father, and they had a short relationship. And she became pregnant, and she told him that she was pregnant, and he was like, "That's not my child," and didn't want to have anything to do with me. And so she raised me on her own. And he suggested that she get an abortion. She refused. Had a friend who talked her out of it. Her mom wanted her to get an abortion, and I'm saying this because it was very prevalent in my life. Growing up, she would always tell me that my father didn't want me and that he wanted her to have an abortion. But around this time, the friend who convinced her to not have an abortion was also very religious and brought her to church. And so she kind of would also intertwine that in the conversation about how basically God saved me from, being aborted, and would constantly talk about this. That was not fun to hear all the time about how my father didn't want me.
Yeah.
It was very hurtful.
So did you have abandonment issues from that? Or feeling
So-
unimportant or unwanted? Like, how did that play out?
So my mom also had a lot of trauma. She was abused as a child, and she was also very open about that. I mean, I believe that you should be honest with your children, but sometimes you shouldn't be so honest. You shouldn't tell them the extent of the abuse that you perhaps endured, because the relationship becomes a mesh. The child starts feeling responsible for how the parent is feeling. And so growing up, I had to deal with a lot of that. I had to be the strong one when my mom was, dealing with a lot of her issues. I didn't know it at the time, but your body keeps score of the things that happen to you.
Yeah.
And she would have anxiety attacks all the time where she felt like she was dying. I remember my first memory of her having an anxiety attack. I was 5, and she woke me up and she said, "I'm dying, I'm dying." And I had to tell her, "No, you're not dying. Just breathe through it." 5-year-olds telling her that. And, she's very religious, like I said. And I'm kind of like, you're religious, but you think you're dying. And I don't quite understand, like, you believe in this, in Jesus, and he's your savior, and, life's supposed to be great, but yet you feel like you're dying. And the anxiety attacks were constant. And so I had to always talk to her. And it's pretty terrifying to be woken up at 3 a.m. when you're sleeping and your parents telling you that you're dying, that they're dying, that they think that they're getting a heart attack. Can you call the ambulance? And so, I had to deal with a lot of her traumas. And so that was really a damper on my own childhood because I felt like I had to be mature. And she would always comment, "Oh, you're so mature," and she would always ask me questions. And it was kind of like the boundaries were not so clear of like, was I a friend? Was I a confidant? Was, I a child? Yeah. And so respect was kind of difficult because, how can you respect your parent when you're basically on the same level that they are? So that was hard.
You said that she endured abuse. So did she also do that to you as well? Because I know unless you do the work, which for our parents' generation, maybe it wasn't as common, you just end up doing what your parents did to you.
Yeah.
Did you experience any of that?
So her abuse was different than mine. She was sexually abused as a child. And so that overshadowed a lot of her parenting. She was very fearful. I don't necessarily think that religion is bad, but I do believe that a lot of people that are broken, they kind of latch on to religion and they don't seek the help that they actually need. She should have definitely talked to somebody about her issues, but she's very adamant that she's fine. She's been healed, and she's kind of tried to put a Band-Aid over those issues. So her abuse was it came from a place of fear that she didn't want me to repeat the same things that she repeated. And I think that she really blamed herself for a lot of the things that happened to her. And so she had a lot of self-hate and self-loathing. And so when I would see her, she didn't love herself. She would constantly criticize her appearance. And she would always look for approval from me, like, "Do you think I'm beautiful?" And I would say, "Yes, of course, I think you're beautiful." And it was very much about her and meeting her needs. And so she felt bad that my father wasn't around, but she'd be like, "But Jesus is your father," And I'm like, well, that doesn't help me because I can't see him. Just another absent person or being, So that was really hard because I would always try to put like a brave face. And I've always been somebody who I tried to act like everything's fine, even if it's not. Yeah. And so growing up, I did that because everything was like falling apart around me. And I didn't really want people to know to the extent that they were falling apart. It was difficult for her to try to keep me in line. So I come from Chang culture. I don't know if you've heard of that.
Yeah. I mean, Chinese culture, we have our own version of that. It's the Chinese feather duster.
Yeah. And I don't really agree with it, but it was the best that she knew. And anytime I would get out of line, she would take whatever. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it was a cord. Sometimes it was a paddle. Sometimes it was a chancla, shoe, flip-flop.
Yeah.
And I was very compliant actually as a child because I was like afraid. Mm-hmm. And she would always say, "I'm not abusing you, and if you tell anybody that I'm abusing you, you're going to be taken away, and you're going to be taken to another place, mm-hmm. and it's going to be worse than what you think it is here." So I'm like, I'm not being abused. So I kept telling myself like, I'm not being abused. But I would say something. I would always question whatever she was saying, and sometimes I would just like get a slap, or I would get a slap like out of the blue, and she'd be like, "Oh, that was for last week." So I was constantly like walking on eggshells with her. I didn't know like when something would happen, and she was loving. I don't want to say that she was a terrible person, but her love was very conditional, and I thought that was normal. So as long as I complied with what she said, everything was fine. And it impacted me in my relationship that I had with others growing up. Also, feeling like I was responsible for other people's emotions and feelings was something that was really huge for me.
What age did you leave home?
She kicked me out when I was 18.
Okay. Were you rebellious during your teen years?
Not really.
No?
No.
Oh, she was just like, you're an
I was
adult.
afraid. Like, my mom is 4'11", but scary.
Mighty and tiny. That's like my mom. Actually, what you're saying, I wonder if it's like an immigrant mentality where it's not, because it sounds like parts of it, my family, aunties, uncles, like that was just how they raised kids.
Yeah.
Like you should be scared of us. Your nervous system is like, you're always on guard. Like, am I going to get hit?
Yeah. I mean, so there was the complying with her rules, and then there was also the religious undertone of God is always watching you. And you need to be careful the way you dress, the way you speak. Like, I couldn't wear pants until I was 9 because for whatever reason,
Did she care a lot? Like how she looked to others?
Oh, yeah.
And like you, like,
Oh, yes, absolutely. You know, what are they going to say about you? I don't want them saying this about my child.
Yeah.
And it was always like, so I grew up thinking like people were always talking about you.
yeah. Makes you paranoid.
You know, like you're on some stage and like you're the
Totally.
center of like
Don't look bad.
Right. Yeah. You can't make me look bad, you know? And she would smile, you know, and I know that this is really common with a lot of parents, you know, smiling in public. And then you're like, get over here. So, you know, purity was like such a big thing. You know, virginity was like a huge thing. You know, you don't have sex until you're married. Don't have a, you know, you need to court you. I need to approve of who you're dating. Basically, I need to approve of who you're getting married to. And my life did not unfold the way she wanted it to, and she's had a very difficult time with that. It's basically her way or no way.
Ah, okay. Well, let's talk about dating and how this kind of played out as you're dating and growing into who you are. Did you have a pattern with dating? Would you choose a specific type of person?
Oh, yeah.
What was that?
So going back to kind of how she raised me like the world is bad. You know, everybody's out to get you. And I started seeing like people are not inherently bad. You know, you're kind of wrong.
Yeah.
You know, there's no need to be so paranoid.
Did you move out of New York?
So I lived in New York until I was 16. So we moved right after 9/11. It was really sad in New York. And we moved to Denver. I was homeschooled actually for 6 years. And I was just like absolutely miserable because she didn't want me to get influenced by the world. And so it was just hard time, so depressed. I'm very social, and I had nobody to talk to. I was basically in charge of my own education. Like, would not recommend. 0 out of 0. You know, like it was bad.
Okay.
And we moved out of New York to Denver, and it's kind of like, if you want to say that I had a rebellious time, that was, I guess, it, because I started seeing like, oh, the world's not bad. You know, I thought I was like this cool like New Yorker, and I like had been around at like 16, and I hadn't because I was super sheltered. So I didn't know. And so we moved, and we always went to mega churches. I don't know, my mom just like loved churches that like you could see. And there's a lot of issues in mega churches. Like, you know, you don't get to that point of having like a lot of parishioners without like doing some dodgy things. So within months of being in Denver, there was a guy, I remember clearly, I walked into the church and he looked at me. He probably saw like, oh, she's new, she's naive, and didn't like him at all. And I was also super religious. Like, I was reading my Bible all the time and praying, and I was like a goody two shoes. And I was like, you know, have a strong relationship with God. Like, God is my father, like, woohoo. And this guy saw me and zoomed in, and it was like, oh, I'm in the youth group. Like, I'm one of the youth leaders. Like, do you want to go to youth group? And I like shook him off, and it was like, didn't really know, like, are you hitting on me, or do you really want me to like go to this youth group? And he was older than me, like 5 years older than me. And I thought I could handle it. Over time, he started to like manipulate me and got my phone number by saying like, oh, I want to go to Six Flags with a youth group. Do you want to come? Like, let me get your phone number. And he started realizing that I was having issues with my mom. And so he was like trying to give me advice. And
Was he older?
yeah,
Like how much older?
5 years.
Okay. But you were 16?
I was 16.
Okay, that
Yeah.
5 years at that
Yeah.
age is a big gap.
Yeah. I forgot to mention that all of my life I've been around broken people. So it's, I had a high tolerance for broken people. I thought that it was normal.
It's familiar. Yeah.
Yeah.
That
You
feels
just
right.
think, yeah, because that's what the church attracts a lot of broken people, because it gives them a second chance. And I'm not saying that people don't deserve a second chance, but you have to be very careful of the people that you surround yourself with, especially a child. And so my mom, she kind of saw that there was something happening, and he tried to talk to her and say, no, there's nothing happening here. And he began to take opportunities to, like, oh, let me, do you want to hang out with me? And God told me that, we should be together. And I'm like, thought I could handle it. And very quickly, it turned into something that was not from the youth group, and I found myself in a really bad situation where I started dating him and seeing him, and he basically groomed me. And I didn't really see that because the entire time I felt like I was in control, but I was not. And so something happened, and he took advantage of me, and I was completely broken and shattered. And then I was told that it was my fault. My mom told me, how could you do this? Instead of thinking like she didn't prepare me, she perhaps, I'm not going to say that it was her fault, but there were certain things I didn't feel supported. I kind of like went towards him, for support. I was looking for something that I wasn't getting in the relationship that I had with my mom. And after it happened, I was in such a bad mental state, and she didn't know how to handle it. Instead of but blaming me and saying how could I, it really hurt me for many years.
I can't imagine. Well, number one, not feeling support, but also blaming you for something like that at such a young age.
Yeah.
That's a lot of unraveling and healing to do in your adult life.
Yeah. And for many years, I did not see it for what it was. Because when she went to the church and she told a youth pastor, and he was like, looked at her like she was crazy. And I'm not saying that my mom is not entirely crazy, but the way she reacted was probably appropriate, and they did nothing. They kind of swept it under the rug. And I would see him in the youth group, and, I ended up breaking up with him because I did not want to have, that relationship with him. And I kind of saw him for who he was. I saw that he was manipulating me as soon as it happened, because I didn't consent. There was no consent. I was not taught anything about consent. He was like, oh, they tore us apart. Like he could not see. I'm like, at 16, I still was like, listen, we didn't talk about this. Like there was no conversation. I didn't understand what was happening, and when I said stop, it was too late. And it didn't click for him. And for years after that, I tried to make him see that, because that was like it was ingrained in me to like, hey, take responsibility. Like, and he could not. And my mom wanted to go to the police, and I was like, no, it was my fault. Like I shouldn't have been there, like when I think about it now, I'm like, why did I blame myself for that? Like it was his fault. And the youth pastor did nothing about it, and the whole church knew about it basically. And I went to school, because at that time I was going to school. I went to school with some of the pastor's children, and they knew what happened, so I had all of these eyes on me. And I think that's when I was like, this is not for me anymore. And I went to the doctor. I told the doctor what had happened, and he had a young child, and he started crying. He's like, I'm so sorry. And I told him, I'm like, I can't sleep. Every time I see him, I'm crying. And he's like, I'm so sorry. I want you to know this is not your fault. And I think that you have like PTSD. And I was crying like all the time. I remember after it happened, I went home, I like laid on the floor and I cried. I was like, I just want to die. This is like so hard. Like, I just want to give up. And I was so depressed. Like, I couldn't talk to my mom. I couldn't talk to anybody about it. I was like, this is my fault. How could I like let God down? And my mom was like, you let God down? Like, how could you do this to me? You gave this away. It was the most precious gifts that you had. And I was just broken. I was so broken about the whole thing. And he would still try to get in contact with me. I want to be with you. I'm like, I don't want to have anything to do with you. Because I realized, I'm like, oh, this guy is bad news. And I didn't know this, but he was actually abused as a child. I just found this a few years ago, that he was abused as a child. He was molested. And so, the cliche of hurt people, it's such a cliche, but it's so true. He didn't have the capacity to even take responsibility for what he did. And he had drug issues. I had no idea, but I just knew that it was bad news. If I stayed in that situation, he was going to keep, something was going to happen. I was going to get, something was going to happen, and the abuse was going to continue. And I just needed to get away from it. And so I did, but it was really difficult. I had a really, really tough, years, especially the first couple of years. I started taking antidepressants. I felt amazing because I went from crying multiple times a day to feeling okay. I'm so grateful to that doctor and the compassion that he showed me, but it caused a lot of problems with my mom also. She didn't know how to handle it. She had this child that was that she felt like she could save in a way, and then I was kind of doing okay, and she didn't really know how to handle it.
Okay, so after this, is this shortly after you moved to LA from Denver?
So I moved to Missouri. Well, she was like, get out. She was telling me for 2 years, get out of my house, get the hell out of my house. So, one day she was like, get out of my house. And she cut my phone off. I was dating this guy that she knew really well. Super boring guy. If you want your kid to date somebody, it'd be this guy. He was so boring. He was a couple years older than me, but he was 35. Super mature guy, good head on his shoulders. And at that point, this tragedy happened to me. And I was like, all right, this guy likes me. And he is a really nice guy. Maybe I should go with this guy, And I let some time pass. I was trying to heal. I was trying to in my mind, I'm like, oh, maybe this will help me to date this guy that's so well-rounded. And that was a mess.
Okay, so you kept looking outside of you.
Yes. So I dated him from 17 and 19, and it was an absolute mess. I've apologized so much over the years, because when I mean that I was a mess, I was crazy.
Oh, well, I mean, we've all had. I mean, that's nice. You're taking responsibility and acknowledging that. But sometimes we like to point fingers at all our exes and blah. But it's have you been awesome every single relationship too? We all have our moments.
Yeah. But I mean, it's embarrassing. I threw stuff at him. It was just not good. Oh. And he had so much compassion in his heart to deal with me. And he saw my mom. He saw exactly, he was in the thick of it with me. Basically, when I got kicked out, all of it. And he wanted something more serious. And I was like, listen, I'm not ready for something more serious than this. So we broke up. But, he did try to save me. Mm-hmm. And years later, he recently actually told me, he's I realized my part, because I've always blamed myself there. I'm he was such a good guy, so well-rounded. And, I kind of was I didn't know how to accept that. I didn't know how to accept his goodness, because I just was always looking for the worst in people. Mm-hmm. And I was so unhappy with myself that I was manifesting this disaster in a relationship. And he actually told me, he's I've done some work too. And I realized that I was trying to save you, and you didn't need to be saved. You needed to save yourself, and you've saved yourself now. But I mean, everything happens for a reason with him. But, after that relationship, it just went downhill. So I ended up, we broke up and remained friends. And then I dated another guy shortly, and then another guy that I was I think I was always looking for a guy to save me from I don't know what. And I think I always had this fantasy when I was younger of my father saving me, because it was tough. We were poor. There was times where we didn't know when we were going to have enough food. The lights would be turned off. We were homeless at some time. So I had a lot of anxiety of like I said, knowing way too much and having these adult responsibilities weighing heavily on me. And so I always had a fantasy of my father coming in, like, well, maybe my mom is wrong. Like, maybe he's not such a bad person. And, getting me things like a bike and, giving me love. And I remember that when I was around 20 something, and my cousin, bless her, she's like so honest, brutally honest. She's like, Elishah, stop dating these guys that are like representing your dad. Like, you are dating these guys because you didn't have a dad around. And I got so insulted.
What'd you do?
Well, I mean, we had a fight. Like, I was like, you don't know what you're saying. That's not true. And she was right. Like, I was dating these guys because I didn't have my dad around, and I was like looking for their approval. And so the next guy I dated, he was on a work trip. He's like, oh, I'm going to go to South Carolina or something like that. Do you want to come with me? And I was like, oh, yeah, sure. We didn't end up going to South Carolina. We went to Missouri, where he was from. Barely knew the guy, but he seemed on paper like he had it all together. And there were so many red flags there. Like, I remember his ex-girlfriend was really present, and she kind of like still wanted to be with him. And she's like, well, did he tell you that I was pregnant once? And of course he was like, she's crazy. Like so many guys like to say about their ex-girlfriends, right? She's crazy. It's never them. It's always the ex-girlfriend. She was still kind of like always in the background, and went to Missouri. And I was like, New York City girl. I'm like, oh my God, this is like my social experiment. There's like cows and there's like farmland. And I'm like, wow. And I'm like, big city girl in this small town. I'm like thinking I like, understand everything.
From teens to like 30, you think you know everything.
Yeah. So I started hair school. And the relationship, so we were living in his mom's basement basically at that time. And things were tough, and he was like very aggressive. And I remember I was saying something to him, and he shoved me. And I was like, I can't believe that you shoved me. And then he smacked me. And I was like, because that had never happened. Well, my mom.
Yeah.
And something in me was like, oh my God, this is what you know. And at something in me was like, didn't feel worthy. Like, I deserved that. I was like, well, maybe I shouldn't have been making fun of him. And I remember that at some point, it didn't happen just one time. It happened a few times. And of course, I was trying to defend myself, but the guy was like 6 foot tall and more, and there was no way, and I'm 5'3", there's 5'4", and there's like no way that I could like defend myself that much, I remember just feeling just like utterly like worthless and undeserving, but I realized, and I was like around 21 at this time, I'm like, oh my God, this is a pattern. This is all I know, and this is not good, and I need to get out of this situation. And he slapped me so hard that there was a red mark on my face. The next day I went to the hair school, and this girl looked at me. I wasn't close to her, and she's like, did he slap you? She just knew. The head teacher, we went to go talk to her, girls, and they're with me. She gave me some advice. It wasn't the best advice, but it was like, I was like beside myself, because I'm like, I don't know anybody here. And she's like, all right, listen, you're at a disadvantage here. You don't really have anywhere to go. Don't make him upset. Finish school and make your way out. And I took her advice.
What would you have preferred to have heard?
Like, come stay with me.
Okay.
Something like that.
Get out like now.
Right. Although at that time, would I have taken her up on that? I don't know, because I was very prideful. It's like, oh, I can handle it. Like, I put myself, and that was also the mentality that I think that I got from my childhood. Like, I put myself in this. I got to take myself out. Yeah. Not accepting help, because, help always came with strings attached. That's how I was viewing the world. And what I was seeing was not good. So I started saving money, graduated, started saving money, didn't say anything, signed a lease, didn't say anything to him. And I was like, when the time came, I told him, I'm moving. I signed a lease. No, don't go. I can change. I was like, oh no, I'm not. He at some point was choking me. I want to kill you. And I'm like, this is not going to be good.
You don't want to upset men like that. A lot of people don't understand this, especially men, what it feels like to not feel safe. There's like a sadness to it, but they're like, my default is like anger first. Like, what the fuck? But when you are put in those situations, you feel helpless and you freeze. And then after the fact, you get pissed about it because you feel like you couldn't do anything.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was like, I'm Latina, like I could handle myself. But no, like the dude he was tall and skinny, but like no, he was stronger than me. And his mom, like she heard everything. And I remember when I got my stuff, I called the police department and I was like, listen, I need help getting my stuff. And they brushed me off. I'm like, you don't understand. This guy, he is not all there. Like, it may turn really ugly and I need help. I brought two girlfriends with me, and the police came. And like I said, they brushed me off. But when they came, he had thrown all of my things out in the yard. We had a phone, like a joint family phone. It's disconnected, and his mom is crying. Nice lady, but, nice to the extent that, like, she should have said something to her son, like, hey, don't be an asshole,
Yeah.
And she was crying. She's like, I'm so sorry, but this is my son. I have to side with him. He was belligerent. So at the end of it, when I got all of my stuff, the police officer was like, you know what? The best thing you did was to leave. It's like, this guy's not good news. But yeah, it was a huge learning experience at that time when I was 21. I was like, it was one of the biggest epiphanies that I had, where I was like, oh, if I continue in this way, I only know this abuse, it's not going to be good for me. Like, I cannot be happy. And I was so depressed and so unhappy and just like the opposite of optimistic, just like waiting for the other shoe to drop. And anytime I was happy, I would just like think like the worst is like behind me, at all times. And my mom was like, come back to God. And I'm like, listen, like, the dude's not doing anything for me, and like, I've seen like what your God is doing. And like, I don't know, it's not very appealing, And I'm not saying I don't believe in God. I just don't subscribe to that, type of God. And at that time, I had actually my little brother, he was born, and they lived in Seattle at the time. And my mom, so sweet when she was pregnant. I was like, oh, maybe she's changed. Mm-hmm. And then after she had him, it was just like a disaster.
Oh, no.
Yeah, it got physical.
Oh, no.
Yes.
So basically like the same.
Yeah, so those two events happening, and actually the police were called at that time too.
Okay.
And I am like I'm like so embarrassed about everything. I'm like, oh my God, the police are coming. Like, this is crazy. Like, why is this happening? And the police, they came to get me and they're like, I'm so sorry that this is happening again. I'm so sorry that this is happening to you. Would you like to press charges? I was like, no, that's my mom. Like, she just had a baby. Like, no. But these two events happening, I was like, oh shit, like stuff needs to change in my life. Like, this is not good. So you think I would have learned then, but I kept dating like the wrong guys, manipulative guys, like then I ended up dating a guy who was like from LA, and that's how I ended up out here and learned a lot of things about him. I was like, he had narcissistic tendencies.
What are some things you did to heal and change the narrative of your story and who you are?
I think I started respecting myself more. So the guy that I ended up moving to LA for, he looked at me, he's like, what you're looking for, you're never going to find it. And I was like, well, maybe he's right. Maybe he's wrong, but it's not you. So, we broke up and, had a ton of fun dating in LA, looking to see what I wanted, what I didn't want. And during that time, I also started working on myself and just taking inventory of the things that I wanted in my life for myself and changing my mindset. And I started doing yoga. I started doing mindfulness. I started realizing like all of this stuff, all of this trauma was living in my body, and it was gonna come out some way. It was coming out, it was coming out with me fighting. I was always on fight or flight mode, looking for the best or the worst case scenario to always happen. And so I remember the last relationship that I had before my husband, I realized that I was getting manipulated in that relationship. And again, that was like the last, like, oh my goodness, like that's also something that I've known from my childhood, somebody always telling me what to do, but in an underhanded way. And I needed to see that. And instead of like looking for the best or always believing that that person had the best interest, that I needed to actually stand up for myself and not listen to what other people were saying about me. Because that's what I was also thinking, that people perhaps knew better about me than I knew about myself. So I started looking within.
Like with yoga, is Kundalini yoga? Or
yeah.
Okay, so Kundalini yoga. Was there anything that prompted you to do the self-awareness work? Or did it just occur to yourself that you had enough, like, this is not working for me, I need to change something here?
Well, I saw how unhappy my mom was, and whatever she was doing was not working. And I was like, I want to do the opposite of that.
Okay. So that was your fuel
That was my
or your
fuel.
inspiration.
Yeah. And I'm like, this person has a lot of anxiety. They're super unhappy. They're always looking, at the worst in people, just not what I want. And I'm like, I don't want to live a miserable life because that is not a life worth living for me. And so that's when I started looking within and like exploring different modalities of things that were not approved of when I was younger.
Oh, like what? Like therapy?
Like therapy, yes. And therapy, like I love therapy. I'm a huge proponent of therapy. I think everybody should take therapy.
If it's accessible to you through insurance or, you can
Yeah.
afford it. And luckily, well, at least in the communities that we're in, like it feels more normalized as it should be.
Right.
But it's funny for like our parents' generation. It's so weird to them. They think it's like bad. Like you have to be psychotic to go see a therapist.
Yeah. I love mindfulness practices and I think that they work really well in conjunction with therapy.
Okay, so mindfulness, like meditation.
Meditation, practices like gua sha, because I really believe that releasing a lot of the tension that we have in our body that's been stored, perhaps even things that are not our own that have been passed along to us. Epigenetics are a huge thing of like, what kind of state of mind was your mother and when she was pregnant with you? Like, those are all things that have affected a lot of us, and we have carried a lot of trauma from our parents also.
Yes.
And so releasing those things by, going to sound baths, by movement, by dancing.
I love all those things. We've done a sound bath together. Have you ever done, I forgot what it's called. It's like when they release the fascia under your muscle.
Like lymphatic drainage?
It's more intense than that. I did it once in Kauai. It was like a 2-day thing because it's that painful.
Wow.
And things like the jaw. I was crying like a kid. He's like, okay, I'm gonna go, because you just, as you know, you hold on to it in your body, but afterwards you feel great. But wherever you have had stored trauma, whether it's your hips or it could even be like your private regions, things like that. A lot of men with circumcision, like all that is stored in your body. It was so fucking painful. It's not for everybody, but I will say that was proof to me, like I have shit that is stuck in my body that needs to get out.
Yeah, there's a reason why some people cry when they get a massage.
Yeah. Or work out really hard. Sometimes that happens to me. I feel like I'm like,
Yeah.
because there needs to be that release, whatever that is. And different things work for different people.
Right.
Right. But I think letting it out, all those emotions like anger, a lot of people have stored anger. I have a ton of it. Hit things.
Yeah, I remember my first Kundalini yoga class, I cried. And it just like came out of the blue. I was like just crying there. And I'm like, what the fuck? I was caught off guard. I was like, where are these tears coming from? I'm like, oh, that's old shit that's coming up.
That had to come out.
Yeah.
Yeah. I experienced that. Have you done Reiki before?
Yeah.
Always a delayed reaction with me because she was like, you didn't cry. I'm like, am I supposed to cry? And she knew. And then on my walk home, and I got home and I sat at my desk and then the tears started coming out like vomiting, but tears. I couldn't help it. It's like, oh, okay, there it is.
Yeah.
Did you read any books that you liked that helped?
The Body Keeps Score is a really good one because that kind of talks about like epigenetics and, which is kind of fairly new, I guess, in science. But they are seeing, like I was saying, the impact that our parents and, generations before have on our DNA. And so when I was pregnant, I was really mindful of trying to break any generational traumas, being very peaceful, meditating, accepting myself throughout the process because I knew I'm like, I don't know, never been pregnant before. I don't know what kind of stuff is going to come up. And so I see the difference actually with my daughter now. Like she's very happy and light and she's able to be herself. And that's very healing for me. It's interesting because every time you think that you heal something, something else comes up.
Forever. Yeah, you're not all of a sudden like, I've done the work, I'm healed.
Yeah, I'm good. No, that's not about being human. Like, you don't just like heal,
Yeah.
and then that's it, because it's the thing that makes life worth living. You begin to overcome these things. So getting married was like a huge thing for me where things came up where I was like, oh my God.
So what were the emotions that came up when, well, 'cause Simon, your husband is such a sweet dude. He's like, I love him so much. What were some emotions that came up when you were getting married?
the commitment part, because I did not have a good example of a healthy relationship. And so I doubted that I could have like a healthy, I'm like, this is too good to be true.
Almost like you want to sabotage it, right?
Yeah.
And by the way, those feelings coming up before you're getting married is very common. I think some people, they're afraid like, oh my God, is there something wrong because I'm questioning this? It is very natural for it to come up, and it doesn't mean anything.
A lot of anxiety. Like I'm talking like I would go to sleep at like 3 in the morning sometimes. I'd like wake up, and I like shake him like, are we doing the right thing? He's like, yeah, I'm sure that you're the one I'm supposed to marry. I'd be like, okay. And then I would come back up again. I would like talk, but hey, yeah. I'm like, but and we had a destination wedding, and that was like, didn't realize it before I started planning, but I kind of like need to see things happening. It was really hard for me to like let go. And so that was like a whole different thing. And then it brought stuff up from my mom also. And she ended up not going to the wedding, and it really affected me. And it overshadowed like my wedding day. I tried to like put a brave face on, but it really, it broke my heart that she wasn't there. It probably for the best, because I don't know how she would have acted there. But nonetheless, it really did bother me. And I've always tried to honor her because it was ingrained in me to, no matter what she did, to honor her, which is kind of toxic in a way, because I think that's exactly why I allowed so much bad behavior. If it's ingrained in you to allow somebody to treat you poorly and you still go back to them, that is a form of abuse, for one thing. And it just sets you up for failure. In the long term, like I can't imagine treating my daughter poorly and her not putting a boundary and not saying, like, calling me out, and then me going back to her and not saying something to her about it. I just can't imagine that.
So what are some things that are important to you to teach your daughter?
That her emotions are valid, that she's not responsible for my emotions, she is allowed to be her own person and to have her own opinions, even if I don't agree with them. There's things that she does right now, and I'm like, she's her own person, and I need to respect her. I need to respect her now as a little person so that she has enough self-respect that she will not tolerate bad behavior when she gets older. I mean, you can say these things, but if the behavior is different, like, sure, my mom was, at some point was saying like, oh, you shouldn't rely on a man, but she was teaching me something else, with her behavior.
We just watch our parents, and you just watch what they're doing, and whether you like it or not, if you're not conscious about it, you do exactly what they do. Even the littlest thing. What was I doing the other day? I think I was like sleeping and my hand was like this, and I was like, oh my gosh, Dad used to do this. It's just like subconscious, like I'm turning into Dad.
I think it's more impactful sometimes, the things that you do around your children, more so than the things that you say.
It is. They watch you, right?
Yeah.
They're like a sponge. And that's their example, is watching you.
Yeah. I think that's why now I'm more mindful of the way I talk to myself, the way I talk about her, to my husband, because I know that she's taking everything in and she's making it part of her reality and her identity now.
Yeah, I think some people, they don't understand the impact that their words have on other people. And it's what you said earlier, hurt people. And so sometimes when it does hurt, you just think like, how much pain and how much does that person have to like not like themselves to be speaking to me like this? Like they speak to themselves way worse.
Yeah, I think that like seeing my mom speak to herself so badly and have so many issues of low self-worth.
Yeah.
I mirrored that because that's all I knew. I'm like, oh, this is normal, for somebody to talk badly about themselves. And so I think that that's why over the years, I've made it such a mission to accept myself and do practices where I'm in my body, because I was so outside of my body for so long, because that's what I was taught also. I didn't have the answers. I couldn't trust myself. That's what religion taught me. I'm human. I'm flawed. I'm nothing really good, and I have to look outside of myself. And that's really harmful because I believe that inherently we do know the answers. You don't have to look for somebody else to give you the answers. You know them inside of you. You just have to sit there with yourself and the answers will come. But a lot of us are taught that we are not worthy of having the answers, that we have to, talk to somebody else to get the answers, or talk to God, or, whatever it is. It's interesting because a lot of the times I think as adults, we try to undo a lot of the things that we learned in childhood.
We try.
We try. We spend a lot of time, undoing a lot of those things. And so, I've spent so many years and doing makeup. I see beautiful women. They always pick out something that I would never even think about. Like, oh, I'm so sorry, my nose, or I'm so sorry, my eyes. I'm like, what are you talking about? But I'm like, oh, I'm going to hold space for you because that is a very big concern for you. And, even if I'm telling you you're beautiful, you're not believing that. It's because it comes from something, inside of them, something that maybe somebody said something in them when they were younger and they're just not at that space. And, a lot of actors and actresses are some of the most insecure people. And I get it because they're on camera all the time and they're being scrutinized, and they have to present their best face forward. And so I think in my job also, I try to bring a lot of the mindfulness with me, breathe, sit with yourself, take a moment and meditate, offer some tips so that they can feel at ease. And also, where am I in my emotional state? Because I believe that energy transfers.
Yeah.
And so I make sure that I am, in a good space myself, so when I'm touching them, that I make them at ease.
That's probably why you get hired too. People, whether think they're spiritual or not, they pick up on those things. And I think, actually, I know that's why I got hired as well, because I used to photograph weddings.
Yeah.
It's your energy.
Yeah.
I mean, the work is one thing, right? They want someone who can do the job, but it's in your energy. That's a big part of why people get hired.
Yeah, and you want to be around somebody who's positive if you're going to work 12 to 16 hours,
Yeah, those set days are long.
They're very long, but all of the years I've seen, like, it doesn't matter how beautiful the person is. If they don't believe it, if you haven't done some of the work to heal those things within you, you will not believe that you are beautiful. But I mean, when society places a lot of importance on a woman's look, so
I know. We were just talking about how like 18-year-olds get filler and Botox, which is crazy. Where do you go from there? I really hope that it's, because you know how humans can be very extreme with things. I hope it goes like the other way, where like the natural look is in again. Is it coming back?
Yes.
Gen Z likes it?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's why people are starting to do more like wash on and face yoga and more mindfulness because, also something else that's very impactful, like if you don't deal with the trauma, it starts coming out in your face.
Yeah.
That's why people start wrinkling actually, because a lot of that stuff, like the way you're scrunching your face, your jaw, all of those things, like I said, your body keeps score of those things. And so, there's issues, like actually traditional Chinese medicine believes that wrinkles, they actually coincide with, an organ in your body. So it's not just, beauty does begin from within. Like you got to take care of the internal, your organs, you have to take care of that, and also your emotional state.
Yeah.
So it's not just putting a Band-Aid by putting on makeup. You actually have to work, inside of yourself to make sure that you are balanced. And so, but that's easier said than done, right?
Of course. And you could tell when there's women who are shining. It comes out of their eyes, and it doesn't matter how old they are. They could be 7-year-olds, but when they have that spark, you know it. Everyone knows it. They're like a magnet. That's always my goal, is that, because I love being around people like that. So it's always a work in progress with the forever healing. And you were mentioning with your mom not attending the wedding, just life goes on. So new things happen where you need to acknowledge, like, did this have an impact on me?
Yeah.
So with your husband, what are some of your favorite qualities about him?
My goodness, that's so many. I like that he, no matter what I want to do, he's always like, okay, yeah, do it. He doesn't try to talk me out of it. He's always so supportive. He's like my sounding board. I also like that early on in the relationship, I remember that I had, my old tendencies of like being crazy or just being anxious about something. And he just laughed at it.
He doesn't take it personal.
And I was like so shocked that he laughed. But I started laughing with him.
That's nice.
And that's not something that, like, all of the work that I've done, I think has led me to be able to, like, laugh at things, because before I would be like, what's wrong with you? But just, like, not taking myself so seriously. And he's just, like, he puts me at ease, and he allows me to be myself, and he loves me unconditionally. And that's something that I did not have before. I always felt like I had to be a certain person. perform a certain way in order to be accepted. And with him, I just feel like I could let my hair down and I could just like look my best, and he really loves me for who I am.
That's sweet. I think in the end, that's what everyone is looking for. I mean, I've never heard anyone say like, "I want to feel like I can't be me," or "I have to put on a show to be loved." It's the best feeling, and I feel similar with my husband. That I'm like, that's the biggest gift. I feel like I could just be me and not just accepted, but loved for it. So for women out there looking to heal and create the relationship of their dreams, what's a piece of advice that you would give to them?
That healing is possible and that you have all of the answers within you. Don't allow somebody else to tell you who you are.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. If people would like to reach out to you or send a DM, where's the best place that they can do that?
On Instagram and the gram.
And what's your handle?
Elishah Urbaez.
I'll spell it out in the comments below.
Yeah, because that's a mouthful.
Okay, thanks for coming on. And next time you come on, because normally we're more giggly when we hang out and talk, you'll have to come back on and we're going to make fun of all the things like our older guy friends who date really younger chicks.
Oh my God, that's like so much to say about that.
That's a different episode. We'll do that next time. But thank you so much for coming on and being so vulnerable and sharing.
Thanks for having me.